Today we are going to learn about budget constraint. Restriction of budget, which does not allow a consumer to purchase all the goods that he wants. Budget constraint is basically the combination of two goods, which we will take goods that a consumer can afford at the given price. Now, if we want to calculate or know about the budget constraint of a consumer, we need three main things. So let's see what are the data required in order to know the budget constraint of a consumer. The first thing is that we need to take two goods for the sake of simplicity, though there can be varieties of goods that a consumer wants to consume. So let's take two goods denoted by x1 and x2, where x1 is amount of goods x and x2 is amount of goods y that a consumer wants to consume. The second basic requirement is we must know the price of these two goods. Now let us assume that price of good 1 which has been taken as x is P1 and the price of good 2, which is y in our case, is P2. Now, after taking the price and the quantity of both the goods, we must know the total income of the consumer. Let us denote the income of the consumer as variable M. Now, the budget constraint of the consumer can be represented as P1 x1 plus P2 x2 is less than equal to M. Now, what does this budget constraint means? In this equation, let us first see that what each term denotes. Here, P1 x1 is the amount of money which is the income of the consumer spent on purchasing goods X. And P2X2 is the amount of income spent on purchasing goods x2. Now let us see the equation once again. Here it says P1x1 plus P2x2 is either less than or equal to the income of the consumer. Now here we can see that the budget constraint of the consumer always says that the total spending on both the goods must be either less than the income of the consumer or equal to the income of the consumer, because consumer can never spend more than his income because he does not have that much money to spend on consuming both these goods. So these combination of goods x1 and x2 will be called as the affordable consumption bundle. So what do we mean by affordable consumption bundle? It is that combination of goods which the consumer can purchase in his given income constraint. So these affordable consumption bundle, which we have denoted by x1 and x2, will be called as the budget set. Now let us look at the budget constraint with the help of the graph and a table. Let us try to understand the budget constraint of the consumer with the help of a curve and a schedule. In the schedule, we can see that the consumer is consuming two different goods, goods x1 and goods x2, with his given income of 100 rupees. The other most important thing given to us is that the price of goods x1 is 10 rupees and the price of goods x2 is 20 rupees. To know the budget constraint of the consumer, let's first assume that consumer is not consuming any quantity of goods x2. In this case, out of his 100 rupees, he can purchase 10 units of goods x1. Whereas if we assume that the consumer is not consuming any quantity of goods x1, then he can buy only 5 units of goods x2. This will give us the intercept of the curve on x-axis and y-axis. The intercept on y-axis is 10, whereas the intercept on x-axis is 5 units. So this is the given budget constraint of the consumer. The budget line can be denoted by two alphabets on both the intercept point. Let's assume that here the given point at 10 units is A, and at 5 units the intercept on x-axis is the point B. Here B is intercept on x-axis, which we can call as horizontal intercept. Whereas the point A with the intercept on y-axis can be called as vertical intercept. AB is the budget line of the consumer. Let's suppose point C lies on 2, 2, which is inside the budget line. This point can be called as an affordable consumption bundle. So let's denote C22 is an affordable consumption bundle of the consumer. But this point lies on an area which is inside the budget line. Calculating the total amount of income invested on purchasing this C consumption bundle, let's see. We have the budget equation as P1x1 plus P2x2 is less than or equal to M. The given money income of the consumer is 100 rupees, whereas the price of goods 1 is 10 rupees multiplied by quantity of x1, which is 2 units, plus price of goods 2, which is 20 rupees multiplied by the amount of goods 2 consumed 2. This gives us 20 plus 40, which is less than 100. What we can make out from this conclusion is that the amount of money income spent on consuming C2 units of good is less than 100. That is the income of the consumer. This shows that any point lying inside the budget line will use partial income of the consumer. Now let's try to analyze this point in detail. The budget constraint of a consumer can be represented in 3 different ways. According to the first representation, we can say that P1x1 plus P2x2 can be less than the income of the consumer. In this case, the consumer spends his partial income and saves some part. Of his income. In the second case, which can be represented as P1x1 plus P2x2 equal to M. This is the case of the points or the consumption bundle lying on the budget line. On the budget line. This point shows that the consumer will completely consume his income. And he will have nothing to save. The last case could be P1x1 plus P2x2 will be greater than the income of the consumer. In this case, we can say that the consumption bundle is not affordable. Not affordable. All these points of x1 and x2 will lie outside the budget line. These combination of goods is out of reach of the consumer, and thus it will lie beyond the budget line. Let's see it in a little detail with the help of a graph. On the x-axis, we have goods x1, and on the y-axis, we have goods x2. Suppose BL is the budget line of the consumer. In this case, any point lying on the budget line will completely exhaust the consumption income of the consumer, whereas any point lying inside the budget line will utilize partial income of the consumer. And in the last case which we have seen, the points which is out of reach of the consumer or not affordable by the consumer will lie beyond the budget line. So we have seen three different points, whereas point A shows that the income is partially utilized, point B shows that the income is completely utilized, and point C shows the consumer cannot afford these bundles. Now, let us see that why we have taken only two goods, and are these two goods enough for representing the consumption bundle of the consumer. So the question here is, are two goods enough? Let's analyze it and try to get an answer to this question. We can say that two goods are often enough. The reason behind this being, we assume X1 is a good consumed by the consumer. Whereas the second good X2 will denote all other goods except goods X1. This goods X2, which is all other goods except X1, will be called as composite good. So we can write X2 as composite goods. Everything else than goods X1. So now if we want to represent the consumption bundle with the help of the budget line, we can say that P1 X1 plus P2 X2 is either less than or equal to the income of the consumer. Here we have assumed that X2 is all other goods except X1. So we can say that let the price of that second good be equal to 1 rupee. Then we can just rewrite our budget constraint as P1 X1 plus X2 is less than or equal to M. Why? Because we have assumed P2 is equal to rupees 1. So here again we can say that two goods are enough for representing the consumption bundle of a consumer. On the budget line, we can also see that P1 X1 plus P2 X2 is equal to the income of the consumer. Where? So on the budget line. Then we can also say that P1 X1 divided by P2 plus P2 X2 by P2 is equal to M by P2. This implies P1 by P2 X1 plus X2 is equal to M by P2. From here we can find that X2 is equal to M by P2 minus P1 by P2 X1. This is the equation of straight line BL with vertical intercept of M by P2 and the slope given by P1 by P2. So here P1 by P2 gives the slope of the line and M by P2 gives us the vertical intercept. Now the slope of budget line measures the opportunity cost of the consumer. So let's say P1 by P2 is equal to the slope of the budget line. This minus sign shows that the slope of the budget line is negative. Now here, the slope of the budget line gives the opportunity cost of how much a consumer has to give up of goods X1 in order to get one more unit of goods X2. So we can write that P1 X1 plus P2 X2 is equal to M when we are looking at the equation on the budget line. So this shows on the budget line. Let's make a change in goods X1 and add delta X1 to the goods X1. So we can say P1 X1 plus delta X1. If we are giving him more of X1, we need to take that much amount from X2. So P2 X2 minus delta X2, which will be equal to the income of the consumer. Because since the income of the consumer is not changing and even the price of the consumer consuming both the goods are same, we cannot increase the quantity of a good without decreasing the quantity of other relative good. Hence, we can say that P1 X1 minus delta X1 plus P2 X2 plus delta X2 will be equal to M. And if this is true, then P1 X1 plus delta X1 plus P2 X2 plus delta X2 should be equal to M. So we can say that P1 delta X1 plus P2 delta X2 is equal to 0. Now solving for delta X1 by delta X2, we can write P1 delta X1 is equal to minus P2 delta X2. Again, here we can write delta X1 by delta X2 is equal to minus P2 by P1. Or we can write delta X2 by delta X1 is equal to minus P1 by P2. So this gives us the slope of the line, and it says that slope of the budget line shows the rate of the substitution of two goods. So this was the basic properties of the budget constraint. Now to learn more about the properties of budget constraint, see the next video.